Hey, class. So here we are doing our online thing. I apologize for not dressing up more, but it's a Saturday afternoon. Uh, you may also notice that I cut my hair. That didn't go very well. Hope it's not too distracting. So here's what we're looking at. What I kind of hope to do is, and remember, everything is getting pushed back a week. So we got one more extra week of class, and then finals week, though your final will be a take home final where you can kind of do it at any time. Um, but basically, what I want you to look for is for each week, there will be a module and what we are doing. For instance, this week, we're talking about World War One, and I know that I am not doing what the CDC recommends because I touch my face like all the time. I didn't realize how much I did that before. So anyway, for instance, for this week, what we're talking about is World War One. So what I want you to do is watch these lectures. I'm not sure how many lecture videos there will be. Kind of depends on how long I want each video to be. Honestly, um, I probably am going to try to keep each video to around 30 minutes or less. Um, that way, it'll be easier for you to find maybe the information that you need. I want you to read the chapter on World War One, and then once you have done that, your assignment basically for this week is to go to the discussion board and ask a question or talk about something you find interesting about World War One or this time period. Uh, I want you to reply to other threads. Not going to set a number of people you have to reply through. What I really hope happens, and I know this is very difficult with discussion boards, is I hope that we have a really good discussion going there, and that's where I can answer some of your questions. If need be, what I will do is I'll post another video later in the week that maybe answers some of your questions that were left out from the video or whatever. Another thing that I kind of hope to do is I'd very much like to get ahead with the videos. That way, if you kind of want to work ahead, you can. Now, what that means is you don't have to be at your computer during our normal class time because I know with everything going on, you've got other things you have to do. So, I'm not going to expect you to do your work at our regularly scheduled time. So, what you can do is just during the week, watch this at your convenience, read the chapter when you can, and just please post something by Thursday or Friday. And that way gives people Saturday and Sunday to kind of reply to your thread, and we'll kind of see how that goes. If we need to adjust that, we will. The discussion board will basically be your participation. So that's where your participation points are going to come from now. The other thing, due dates. Right now, the drop boxes are open for everything. At least they should be if I did it right. If I didn't, please let me know. You can pretty much ignore all of the due dates. We will make that now our very last week of class so that you have time to kind of work on things on your own and at your own pace. If you want to get finished early, awesome. If not, that's okay too. I'll try to get ahead as much as I can. I can't really promise too much because I don't know really how this is going to work. But it is kind of a different kind of situation. Metal Yo in a cup, so that's different, right? So, we're just going to kind of do this the best that we can. If anytime you have any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to contact me. I gave you guys my phone number. You can email me. One thing that I will mention again, by the time you see this, is probably be in an email. You can actually put eLearn on your phone. There is an app called. Let me make sure that I get this right. Of course, I got to sign into my phone here. It is called Bright Space Pulse by D2L, and you can sign into the Vol State eLearn system. I recommend doing this mainly because, well, it'll give you notifications every time one of your professors updates something to eLearn, which is where you're going to get all of your instruction now. And if worse comes to worse, if you have an internet problem, then maybe you can actually do this on your phone. This is, well, you probably can't. Yeah, that didn't work too well. You can't really see that. So it's Bright Space Pulse. You can find it in the App Store on your phone, and I very much recommend that. So let me just kind of sketch out the next couple of weeks for us. This week, World War I, basically just lecture and reading. I hope we have a good discussion. Next week's going to be a little bit different. I told you guys about how we were going to do a movie critique on the movie Inherit the Wind. Well, as of right now, I actually found a copy of a different version of the movie on YouTube. So what we're going to do for next week is I am going to post that video, and I want you to watch it and then do the movie critique. And I'll also have another article or so, probably one. If I find others, I'll post those too, for you to read. And that'll be what you do for next week is the movie. And then the following week, we're going to talk about the 1920s. And then after that, the Great Depression and the New Deal. And then World War II we might spread that out a little bit. Then the Cold War. And we'll kind of see what we end up doing with the Cold War. That may or may not be our last topic for the semester. So again, I hope if you have questions, you'll let me know. Now, let me go ahead and get started 7 minutes into this video. And I do hope the sound quality is good. I'm also going to try to turn on closed captioning, which will probably not be very good, but we're going to do the best that we can. All right, so World War I, the war to end all wars. Well, the first one of those. The British will call it the Great War. We will call it America's time to shine. This is the moment that the United States will emerge as a world superpower, whether we like it or not. And there are going to be a lot of people who don't like it. Now, where are we going to start this lecture? Well, I teased this out, I think, long ago before spring break and long ago before our isolation and all of that good stuff. But I don't start at the beginning of World War I. I go back in history a little bit because I want to give you guys, and that'll be kind of the focus of this first video, I want to give you guys the real beginnings of this. And for that, we have to go back to a time even before Germany, who is going to be the driving force between World War I and World War II. We're going to go back to a time before Germany actually exists. Now, the person that is going to be the driving force behind Germany is a man named Otto von Bismarck. And I apologize about my hands. I don't really know what to do with them. So here's what's going on. There is no Germany. You have a collection of states, some of which belong to what's called the Holy Roman Empire, which was a perfect name at the time, except for it wasn't holy, it wasn't Roman, it really wasn't an empire anymore. And this is also a time when nationalism is becoming a force. What does nationalism mean? Well, it means that these various national groups, like Germans, or Russians or Poles or whatever, there's this great desire to form your own nation. In fact, the Italians will actually form Italy, the Kingdom of Italy, on March 17th, 1861, which is really hard for a lot of people to understand because of the Roman Empire. We always kind of thought Italy was this whole thing, and it really wasn't again until 1861. It's actually not whole until after World War I. Now, but in the case of Germany, in the case of the Germans, it looked like there were two major German powers that could bring about unification. The first one was Austria. Austria was really kind of outside of the Germanic lands, and they kind of had their own empire, but they're kind of the biggest power. The other great German power was a state called Prussia, and that's Prussia. Prussia actually started out as a very, very small country. In fact, it started out so small, started out as one territory, and then it gained another territory that wasn't really even that close to it, and then a third territory. And yet somehow Prussia held together, probably because they spent over 50% of their budget, state revenues on a military, but they're able to hold on together and they're able to expand. So Prussia will actually become the most powerful in the Germanic lands. In 1834, they formed what was called the German Customs Union and eliminated all tolls on the rivers and roads among various member states. All German states except for Austria joined. So it began to look like that Germany would be bringing about German unity. In 1848, the Prussian Parliament, the Prussian Constitution gave the appearance of a constitutional monarchy with a bicameral legislature, though not really. The lower house was elected by universal male suffrage, but they divided the voting classes into three different groups. The highest taxpayers got the most votes. Kind of feels like we have that going on here sometimes, I know. In theory, the biggest taxpayers are supposed to get the most seats, though the middle class ended up dominating this. They wanted real parliamentary government, but the king remained strong. The ministers of government answered to the king. Now, where we're going to start here, and the Parliament does have some legislative and taxation powers, kind of like how the British Parliament did, but it's not as powerful. So we're going to begin. I know that's hard to say since I've been talking about this for about 5 minutes. 1861, when King Frederick William IV dies, he is succeeded by his brother William I, who will reign from 1861 to 1888. William comes in. He has his own ideas. He wants to double the size of the army. He wants a mandatory 3-year conscription. Middle-class liberals did not want compulsory military service because they were afraid of how much power that the Prussian military already had. So they rejected his military budget in 1862. Well, William I says, okay, fine. You want to play hardball. I'm going to bring in a new prime minister. His name is going to be Otto von Bismarck, and that's Bismarck, who will live from 1815 to 1898. He is an extremely conservative figure who dominates German and European politics until 1890. Now let's talk about Otto von Bismarck, who I will argue is probably the greatest German to ever live. And most importantly, he's not a Nazi, so that's a good thing. So let's talk about who he was. Otto von Bismarck was born into a land-owning aristocracy. At university, he enjoyed wine, women, and song, because that's what you did at university back in those days. He also read German history. He earned a law degree to work in the Prussian civil service. It's always kind of a big Prussian trait that they really push public service. He was a man who always wanted to be in charge. He has served as a delegate to the German Confederation. He had been the Prussian ambassador to Russia and France. So he learns a great deal about politics all over Europe. He will wage wars, but only when other avenues were exhausted and only when he was sure he would win. He practiced something called realpolitik, and that is a German phrase, R-E-A-L, like our real, and then politik is P-O-L-I-T-I-K, which means that his foreign policy, his decisions were actually rooted in reality. Now, you might be thinking, well, yeah, duh, that's basically how that should work. Policy should be rooted in reality. That's not always the case. In fact, foreign policy, often we look at the world as we want it to be, not the way it is. For instance, up until Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger, after the Chinese communists won the Civil War in China, we basically ignored them. We pretended they didn't exist. That was not real politics. It is Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon who will bring back the idea of real politics and dealing with the world as it actually was. But back to Otto von Bismarck. He disliked those who opposed him. Who doesn't? In 1862, Bismarck resubmitted the army budget with a strong appeal. The legislature said no. Bismarck said, fine, I'll collect my own taxes, and he reorganized the army himself. He then blamed the liberals for destroying the constitutional government. From 1862 to 1866, he governed Prussia and ignored Parliament, while Parliament did absolutely nothing. So he's got his military. Now he is trying to make Prussia a great German and European powers. How is he going to do that? He's going to do that through a series of 3 wars. The first war takes place in 1864. I'm jumping ahead. I apologize. It is the Danish War, fought over breakfast pastry. No, it wasn't. Don't write that down, please. So basically, first thing he did is diplomatically, he made sure he was only fighting one power at a time. And what the Danish War is going to be over are 2 duchies controlled by the Danish, the duchies of Schleswig and Holstein. In 1863, Denmark had tried to, and I'm not going to spell those for you because they're not that important to remember. Just know that there are 2 duchies. In 1863, Denmark tried to incorporate these areas into their country in defiance of international agreement. Both had large German populations. Bismarck pressured Austria into jointly declaring war on Denmark. War was declared on February 1st, 1864. The Danes were defeated fairly quickly. They surrendered Schleswig and Holstein. Prussia took Schleswig and Münster. Austria took Holstein. Bismarck then realized that if he really does want to become a great power, he has to exclude Austria. And so he's going to use the administration of the duchies as a source of friction between Prussia and Austria. And he began to negotiate with Austria while at the same time isolating. So what's going to happen, excuse me one second. What's going to happen is he is going to work diplomatically. He is going to get the Russians to remain neutral, and that's Russia with an R. Prussia has supported Russian action in 1863 when they suppressed a Polish revolt. The Russians and the Polish never have gotten along very well. We'll see that. He bought off French support with some vague promises of territory. Something like, oh, yeah, we're totally going to give you some area over here. It's probably the Austrian Netherlands that they offered. I'm not really sure. But it was vague, and Bismarck really had no actual intention of going through with it. He also got Italy. He also made an alliance with Italy because Bismarck promised Italy Venetia, which is what helped make Italy whole. So, on June 14th, 1866, he uses the joint occupation of the duchies and the Danish territory to provoke war. Most expected a quick victory for the Austrians. The Prussians used breech-loading needle gun, which had a faster rate of fire, and they used their superior network of railroads. It was a quick fight, but it went the other way. On July 3rd, the Austrian army was defeated. The German states north of the main river joined into the German states north of the main river joined into the Northern German Confederation, which was dominated by Prussia. The southern German states remained independent but signed military agreements with Prussia. Prussia will then annex Schleswig, Holstein, Hanover, and Hesse-Kassel, making them a larger country. Bismarck, doing a victory lap, made the parliament pass a bill that made his tax collection legal. He allowed each state in the new Northern German Confederation to keep their local governments. The Prussian king, however, became the head of the Confederation. Bismarck was the chancellor. He will be known as the Iron Chancellor. You may have heard that term before. There's actually a book called The Iron Chancellor. So, Bismarck is halfway to creating a total Germany. But he's looking around Europe, and there is one country that is basically in his way. There's one country that poses a major threat to his national security and his ambition. That country is France. Nobody likes the French. And that brings us to a war that you may have heard of, but maybe don't know a whole lot about. You won't learn a whole lot here because I'm just going to hit the basics. It's called the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 to 71. So, notice how I popped in my elbow? That's the right way to do it. So, by 1866, we got Prussia dominating northern Germany. Bismarck knows that conflict with France is inevitable. Prussia is definitely a threat to French security. Now, the leader of France at the time is a man named Napoleon III. He is the nephew of the other Napoleon, and he, through a series of machinations, had become emperor just like his uncle. And things aren't going particularly great. So Napoleon III needs a diplomatic success of some sort to deflect attention away from his failings at home. It's kind of one of those situations where, it's a, hey, look over there kind of approach to governing. We've seen it here before. So what Napoleon III wants to do is he figures the best thing he can do to unite all of France was to humiliate the Prussians in some way. He got his chance. Queen Isabella of Spain had been deposed by a revolution. The throne was offered to a man named Leopold, who was a distant cousin of the Prussian king. France objected to this. They said they would not be surrounded by Hohenzollern. Let me try to pronounce this name. Hohenzollern kings. That's the family name. So France and Napoleon III make such a big stink. William I is forced to withdraw Leopold's name from consideration. I'm sure that made Leopold super happy. And that should have been the win that Napoleon needed, but he goes too far. He decides that it wasn't enough just for his name to be withdrawn. He demanded a formal apology from William I. Now, here's the thing. William I actually wrote this apology. But before it could be sent, Bismarck intercepted it. He edited it to make it insulting to the French. It's not hard to insult the French. So what is the end result? France declares war on Prussia. July 15th, 1870. France was absolutely no match for the superior Prussians. The southern Germans joined in their military alliance with Prussia. The Prussian forces moved into France. At Sedan, the French army and Napoleon III was captured on September 2nd, 1870. The Second Empire collapsed. Paris surrenders 4 months later on January 28, 1871. The peace treaty is signed in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, and it is Versailles, not Versailles. France has to pay 5 billion francs in reparations. They have to give up 2 provinces called Alsace and Lorraine. This angered the French, which will cause basically the tension you're going to see between Germany and France through World War I and World War II and in the intervening years. Now, if this wasn't bad enough, so the southern German states agreed to join the Northern Confederation. This is the creation of Germany. Now, just to stick it to the French even more, On January 18th, 1871, at the Palace of Versailles in France, William I, or Wilhelm, was named Kaiser of the Second German Empire. Can you imagine how upset the French probably were about that? So that is how we get Germany. So how do we get to World War One? Well, the intervening years, basically, Bismarck did a really good job of kind of keeping the peace because he had basically gotten what it was that he wanted. He created a Germany, and so the best thing for him was in Europe at that time was stability. Now, as I try to get back to my notes that I need. Now, basically what you're going to have is you're going to have 50 years of peace among the major powers of Europe, thanks mainly to Bismarck. In 1873, Germany made an alliance with both Austria-Hungary and Russia. This is known as the Three Emperors League because all three countries had a king or an emperor or a Kaiser or whatever. Now, this wasn't a great alliance because Russia and Austria were at odds. Austria and Russia both wanted to expand, and really the only place in Europe they could expand was a place in Southern Europe called the Balkans. Both wanted it. Made sense for Austria because it was just south of them. For Russia, there's a certain nationalism reason for it, ethnic reason. The people who live there are called Slavs, which is a terrible, terrible thing. It actually meant slaves. So you can see how, they're going to be treated in history. But basically, the Russians are Slavic people too, so they kind of see them as like their little brothers or whatever. So what this alliance actually does is it stops Russia and Austria-Hungary from expanding into the Balkans and fighting with each other. Now, the big problem here was the Ottoman Empire. Now, the Ottoman Empire, and I wish I had a map to show you, but you got your book and there's a map there. The Ottoman Empire was probably the last of the great Islamic empires. It had, in the 1700s, made its way into Europe. It had basically been stopped around Transylvania. And they had kind of ended up controlling most of the Balkans up into the beginnings of the 20th century. Eventually, they're going to be treated like any other empire. Occasionally, someone would call for a holy war, but, it's kind of a devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. Now, the problem is the Ottoman Empire is in decline. And their government is weakened by corruption and inefficiency. Really, the weird thing is the only thing that really kept the Ottoman Empire intact during this time in the late 1800s, early 1900s, was the intervention of other European powers. As again, I said, it's the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. So Austria really wants the Balkans for expansion. The Russians want an overland route to Constantinople, gives them a port on the Mediterranean Sea. Germany holds them back. Now, what brings it to a head, 1876, Serbia and Montenegro declared war on the Ottoman Empire. Both were defeated. However, Russia used the opportunity to fight the Ottoman Empire, which actually Austrians were okay with it, and forced the Ottomans to sign what was called the Treaty of San Stefano, 1878. It created a large Bulgarian state, Bulgaria. It was seen as a Russian satellite, so Austria was mad. A Congress of European powers was called to revise the treaty. It was called the Congress of Berlin. It met in the summer of 1878. And it was controlled by Bismarck. It undid most of the treaty and embarrassed Russia. The size of the Bulgaria was reduced. The rest of the territory was given back to the Ottoman Empire. Serbia, Montenegro, and Romania were given independence. Bosnia and Herzegovina, remember those two names, Bosnia and Herzegovina, were placed under Austrian protection. They were allowed to occupy but not annex. Now, new alliances are sought after the conference. Russia is so humiliated, they feel like they have to pull out the Three Emperors League. Germany will ally again with Austria-Hungary in 1879. In 1882, their alliance is joined by Italy. It is called the Triple Alliance. The Triple Alliance is Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. It's kind of hard to kind of keep track of these uh, alliances. So if you got any questions about that in the discussion board, or shoot me an email or whatever, I'll try to explain it better. This is kind of what I mean. Like if I need to do a clarification video later, I will. So Bismarck is probably the smartest man in the world at this point. And while he understood that Russia could not be allied with Germany and Austria-Hungary anymore, his big fear was that Russia would ally itself with France. Now, France and Russia have two very different governments. France has a democracy. Russia is an autocratic government. But what Bismarck does is he signs what is called a reinsurance treaty with Russia in 1887. And this was basically done to make sure Russia and France did not ally with each other. Now, basically, this is kind of a non-aggression pact. It basically says we're not in a formal alliance with each other, but we're cool with each other. So it was really smart. Now, the problem is 1890, William I dies, and a new emperor, Wilhelm II, or William II, if you want to Americanize it, which we often do, comes to power. And you know how young people are. You all are young people, you know. He comes in with his own ideas. One of the first things he does is he fires Otto von Bismarck because he wants to seek a new foreign policy. He wants to make Germany more powerful. He, quote, sought Germany's, quote, rightful place in the sun. First thing he did was he dropped the reinsurance treaty with Russia. He said, there is no way Russia and France would ever ally with each other. Well, guess what happens in 1894? France and Russia signed a treaty in 1894. Oops, he kind of screwed that one up, and now Germany is surrounded. In 1907, because of German activities abroad, Great Britain is concerned, and they actually join into a loose alliance with the French. That's right. The French and the British, who hate each other so much, can agree that they both hate Germany more. And so they become closer because of Germans' activities in places like Africa. In 1907, there is a loose alliance known as the Triple Entente, E-N-T-E-N-T-E, and it's Great Britain, France, and Russia. Basically, what this means is that Europe is divided into two groups, and each group will be inflexible and unwilling to compromise. There will be several crises between 1908 and 1913, starting with a Bosnian crisis in 1908 and 1909. What happens in 1908 is Austria annexes two Slavic-speaking areas of Bosnia and Herzegovina. The country of Serbia did not like that because they are the ones who really want to become a great power down there. Austria wanted to limit Serbian power because they thought it could threaten the fragile unity of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. What's different about the Austrian-Hungarian Empire is that it is made up of about 100 different nationalities and has about 100 different languages. So they're really afraid of nationalism as a force. And they're afraid that if a powerful Slavic nation like Serbia rises, then the Slavic-speaking portions of their empire could break off. So Austria wants to limit Serbian power. Russia sees themselves as big brother Serb, and they supported Serbia. Now, Serbia is beginning to prepare for a war with Austria. William II intervenes. Of Germany intervenes. He demands that Russia accept the annexation of Germany, or that they would declare war on Russia. Russia backs down because a couple years ago, 1905, we talked about it briefly, the Russo-Japanese War. It was the first time that a non-white country had defeated a white country in a war, and Japan had basically devastated them. So if you're Nicholas II, the Tsar of Russia, you feel like you're not in a position to get into a war, so he backs down in this particular case. He's not very popular anyway. So Russia backs down. We have a second Balkan crisis in 1912. Serbia, Bulgaria, Montenegro, and Greece call what is called the Balkan League, Balkan, sounds like a bowling league to me. And they defeated the Ottoman Empire in the First Balkan War. Problem is they won too quick. The big problem is they couldn't decide how to divide Macedonia and Albania. So a second Balkan War comes back in 1913. This time it's Greece, Serbia, Romania, and the Ottoman Empire. They band together to defeat Bulgaria. So obviously Bulgaria was the one being the jerks about all of this. Bulgaria received a small part of Macedonia, with the rest divided between Serbia and Greece. Serbia has not yet realized its goals. The Balkan Wars created a tension among the powers. Serbia wanted a port on the Adriatic, but is blocked by Austria. Serbian nationalists began to portray Austria as their monstrous enemy. Russia felt like they could not back down in the next confrontation and began preparing for a war in the West. France and Russia renewed their alliance, promising to support each other in conflict. Europe remained in two armed camps. Anything could start a war. They called the area of the Balkans the powder keg. They're just waiting for that match. That is a good place to end this first video. This is kind of our background information getting up to World War I. In the second video, we shall talk about the war, the beginnings of the war itself in Europe, and then we'll get to the United States. So see you all in the next video.